voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
We received some horrible and sad news today about an American in Paris. Our man in Paris, in fact. Christopher Dickey was a friend of ours. He was a frequent guest of ours here, often from his perch high above the Champs-Élysées with the Arc de Triomphe in the background. Always live, which meant getting up insanely early just to talk with us and our audience was always richer for the experience and his knowledge. Chris Dickey was the real deal, you see, a journalist in full. One of those great and curious storytellers who seemed to know just about everything and everyone. He covered, by my count, every war there was over the last couple of decades, from Central America to Africa and the Balkans to the Persian Gulf. He started at the Washington Post, later was Paris editor at, as we now call it, the old Newsweek. He cared way more about journalism than Newsweek's owners, and after its third sale, he became world news editor at the Daily Beast, mentoring a ton of writers along the way. He was a clear-eyed patriot. As he saw it, love of country meant holding us to account, all of us. And we found him in a melancholy mood when he last appeared here back in May, watching the news from home in his Paris apartment, which that day included armed pro-Trump protesters storming the Michigan State House.
Well, I think images like that crystallize exactly what Europeans think about the worst of America, the worst craziness of America, the white supremacy, the guns, all of that. But we're talking about a relatively small number of people there. The bigger problem is that the United States has essentially abdicated leadership at the moment of the greatest global crisis in living memory. And that is a real problem. This is a kind of situation where you would have expected the U.S. to take the lead, to be out in front, to be doing things better than anybody else. Even a few months ago, pandemic studies showed that the U.S. was the best prepared country in the world. But in fact, we've shown no leadership in the United States. It's a disastrous situation. We are leading the world in deaths from this disease, and we'll have tens of thousands more before this is over.
That was from May 1st, and sadly, for the record, sadly for all of us, he was right. Christopher Dickey was the son of the legendary Southern writer James Dickey, former poet laureate of the United States. James Dickey wrote the novel Deliverance. He had a bit part as the sheriff in the movie. When the photo was taken with his incredibly cool son Chris on the right, looking for all the world like period Bob Dylan, Chris wrote a great book called Summer of Deliverance about that summer with his very complicated father, one of 7 books that Chris Dickey authored. He had the best words. He also took and posted a ton of photos, like the sidewalk at 30 Rock, where there were still people there last fall before an appearance on the air with us, and the sidewalk in Paris, posted just hours before he died. Our friend, the talented Mr. Dickey, was 68 years old when he died of heart failure in Paris. We want to express our condolences to his family. We urge all of you to read what he wrote and left behind for all of us.
It is Friday, the 17th of July of 2020, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunnar the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Folks, we are truly all Nighthawks in the diner of life. The French 77s are virtually poured and ready for your imbibing pleasure in the virtual world. If you're able, if the time allows, if it's the proper time wherever you are in the world, and you happen to mix up a French 77 in the analog plane of existence, do take care. They be tasty, but they be potent as well. Okay, well, did you see the Mary Trump interview on Rachel last night? Oh my God. Now, I wouldn't say that the most important takeaway is that Donald Trump uses the N-word and calls Jews kai. You know what I mean. On a regular basis, we all know that. But it is important, and I think telling, that an actual family member who lives it and says, we hear it so often, you don't even think about it anymore. That sounds kind of familiar now, doesn't it? Wow, yeah. I remember way back when I was just a little tyke. At least on my mom, I'll just say on my mom's side of the family. Well, yeah, pretty much on my mom's side of the family. And I'll explain why my birth father's side of the family, I couldn't really take a true assessment. But, most of my mom's family was nearby, and they, the extended family, they harbored a few racist sentiments, shall we say. Not the whole family. I'll just say a vocal minority, as it always is when it comes to racists. Okay, so, yeah, though their numbers be small, their influence is quite outsized, always. But anyway, I remember hearing these terms, and fortunately, there were immediate family members who said, no, that's not how it is. Okay. Now, on my birth father's side of the family, he was adopted as an infant, so we can only go so far back on his actual family himself. But, my grandma, my dad's adopted mother, was an English professor. and my grandfather, he had been one of the strongmen in the golden age of the strongmen, and then went on to a professional wrestling career, made money off of that, and then bought a big rose farm in Oregon. He lived in Montana, where he grew up, but from the proceeds from his strongman and professional wrestling career, bought some land in Oregon and raised roses, almost on an industrial scale. But because my grandma was fairly learned and erudite, we never heard that terminology on that side, and in fact, she was a devout Catholic. But I think that she probably, I don't remember the Carmelite nuns being invoked by my grandma. But I think that her sentiments would have lay very close to their sentiments, indeed. But, I heard the N-word and any number of anti-Semitic terms bantered about, and it just seemed normal, did it? No, it grated. I couldn't believe anybody would use these terms. They just seemed wrong on first hearing, even. But when adults say them, you wonder. Fortunately, we, in my immediate family, had a much more broader range of experience, shall we say, and that kind of racism was abnormal. Mary Trump expressed a kind of normalcy about it. In the older generations, that's just how they talked. Yeah, they did. They really did. Okay, so I think actually some of the other big takeaways, I think, are the tax issues, how she got scammed out of her inheritance, and any other number of issues, how, she only found out about it because of dogged investigative journalism. deep dive journalism, which they're trying to get rid of. Which I should mention that when we get into the offerings here in the Bistro Cafe, the impact that the loss of Chris Dickey has on the greater scheme of things, to lose an erudite journalist and author like that is a sad thing. It's a passing of an age, and I consider that to be, well, sad. And will the young uns pick up the slack? Yes, there's quite a few out there. If they're not picked up off the street willy-nilly by badgeless federal officers. Yeah, what's up with that? We're going to get into that story. To also Portland, Oregon. I went to school there. I live there. Oh my God, what the heck is happening? They couldn't come and take some actual armed, violent anarchists out of a wildlife refuge, and they couldn't do that. I mean, even when they beat up a few scientists, maybe the federal officer said, "Hey, beat up a few scientists? Yeah, do it. Come on." And the Bundys are. So I'd like to see, violent anarchists like the Bundys just picked up off the streets willy-nilly, thrown into an unmarked van, and have at it. But no, I think that the sentiments lie with the Bundys. Some big law enforcement agency threw their weight of their endorsement behind Trump. Isn't it weird how law enforcement, given a chance to become the most fascistic element of a government, always does? Can you imagine, please, if Obama sent in federal officers to pick up some Tea Party assholes with their placards of nooses and oak trees? Just pick them up off the street willy-nilly. Do you think any level of law enforcement, I'm not even talking about the feds, how about some hired security company? No. If Obama said to pick up a Tea Party guy for graffiti, do you think law enforcement would have done it? No, they would have ignored it, and they would have. And, Obama wouldn't have done that in any way, and he didn't. This is Trump's profile in carnage. He is running on profiles in carnage. Except when it comes to actual carnage like the virus, then it doesn't exist. Yeah, there's like maggots here in town who are insistent that the virus is going away. And you know what they're citing? Well, the CDC doesn't have any numbers on it anymore. That's how their brains work. They're zombies. They're not content to eat our brains. No, they gotta eat up their own brains too. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it would be rather cinematic. In fact, I'm going to pitch it right now. Hold on. I'm only kidding. Okay, well, what's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, veteran journalist and author Chris Dickey is remembered at the top, and when I talk about erudite, he was the epitome of erudite. I really appreciated that man. I was probably, I got to tell you, more appreciative of his father, Chris Dickey, being the great American poet laureate. He was a poet laureate of the United States. And Deliverance was a seminal cinematic tour de force that had a great impact on me when I was much, much younger. And Chris Dickey went off on his own, and so many people, even Joy Reid, was unaware that he was the son of the great poet and novelist James Dickey. Now that says something. Not Chris Dickey, the son of James Dickey, just Christopher Dickey. So yes, do what Brian Williams suggested. Go back and read Chris Dickey's work. He was a seminal author in American letters, and I think that probably a marker in the evolution of journalism today. What's on the rest of the menu? The acting head of DHS visited Portland, Oregon to inspect the SA Gestapo, sent over the 4th of July holiday, by the way, to show elected local and state anarchists who is the boss. Yeah, you know, if you're a Democrat, you're an anarchist. Indeed. A massive illegal dump is discovered by New Mexico officials cleaning up an old limestone mining pit. Yeah, they just stumbled on it. And an Iowan prosecutor says he is too busy to provide evidence against a Des Moines Register reporter he wants to throw in jail for covering the George Floyd protests. Too busy. You know, he says it's on the rocket docket. I mean, it's one of those things that, you know, you put in the paperwork and they just send him to jail. Why do I have to give him any evidence? I don't know. Is this America anymore? After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the European Union's top court canceled the data sharing privacy shield agreement because the American government can snoop on people's data. Boy, we are becoming such a pariah. What happened? And a Canadian federal court recommended an external review of its nation's spy agency. Well, at least someone has evolved enough to be self-reflective. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is our chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the page at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will then notice the link to our Patreon page. And if you could pledge a recurring monthly pledge of, say, how about the cost of an espresso type coffee drink, when we could buy those with impunity. If you could send funds our way, only if you can afford it, please. We are able to stretch those dollars so that we can pay our bills and continue resisting as the founders originally intended so many years ago. And thank you to those who have been making recurring contributions to us. Your generosity has helped us fulfill our civic duty by paying our bills and resisting as the founders intended originally. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. That's taken care of by Tom, who is in Portland. And when the you-know-what hits the fan, Tom's going to be there. And we will be getting on-the-ground coverage of whatever might be happening. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, do so at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary, and it will always be a diary to me. I'm sorry, I'm old school now. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that linked up on social media for your social media pleasure. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and most importantly, please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., 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 etc. Okay, let's dive into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, and it's out of the Associated Press by Jillian Flaccus. The head of the Department of Homeland Security visited Portland, Oregon yesterday, Thursday, just hours after issuing a scathing statement that called protesters who have taken to the streets every night for nearly 2 months violent anarchists, and a violent mob that have kept the liberal Northwest city under siege. Really? I want to remind folks, the actual violence had been perpetrated by the cops and local officials who this acting head, Chad Wolf, wants to call anarchists because that's what he believes all Democrats are anyway. They're coddling these anarchists, so we got to come in here and show them, hey, we're the daddy. It was perpetrated by the cops, and the escalation of violence has been by these federal officers, such as they are. Acting secretary. See, you can't even get anybody confirmed. All right? Somebody enabled the enabling acts here, and I want to know who. Yeah, we know who. We've been barred. That's what we've been. Acting Secretary Chad Wolf, whose visit was met with anger from local officials, said state and city authorities are to blame for not putting an end to 47 days of protests in Portland that have increasingly targeted the federal courthouse. And what was the targeting? Tagging. They brought in the SA Gestapo to pull people off the streets, throw them in unmarked vans, and rendition them to who knows where. Because a federal courthouse was tagged. 10 years for destroying a monument? That's not destroying anything. This is Donald Trump exerting dictatorial powers on an American city. He said he wanted to occupy a city, and now he has. The protests in Oregon's largest city, following the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, have often devolved into violent clashes between smaller groups and the police. The unrest has caused deep divisions in a city that prides itself on its activism and progressive reputation. The violent clashes actually have been perpetrated by right-wingers who are in there stirring up the you-know-what. And we even, unfortunately, and this is bad for the cops, video evidence of them in cohort with these Proud Boy, anarchists. And I'm talking right-wing violent anarchists, and the cops are glad-handing them and giving them succor, if not outright protection, if not outright involvement, if not actually having them within their own ranks. That's why our cops have been clapped down on, because they were escalating the violence for whatever reason. More profiles in carnage. Each night, lawless anarchists destroy and desecrate property, including the federal courthouse, and attack the brave law enforcement officers protecting it. What's the attacks? Yelling? Holding signs? Where were the feds grabbing people off the streets in Michigan when they took over that state house with guns? Where were they? I don't know. Maybe they were sent there by Donnie. Federal officers recently sent to Portland by Trump have escalated tensions in the past 2 weeks, particularly after an officer with the U.S. Marshal Service fired a less lethal round at a protester's head on July 11th, critically injuring him. Yeah, the guy was holding up a big 8-track cassette thing, like in the movie, the Cusack movie. Shot him right in the head. Ted Wheeler, the mayor, and other local officials have said they did not ask for help from federal law enforcement and have asked them to leave, like the feds are going to do it now. Local autonomy, screw you. Democratic Governor Kate Brown called Wolf's visit political theater from Trump and said he is looking for a confrontation in Oregon in hopes of winning political points in Ohio or Iowa. The state's 4 Democratic federal lawmakers also sent a letter this week to Wolf and U.S. Attorney General William Barr to oppose the federal deployment in Portland. A temporary federal court order banned police in Portland from using tear gas Now, thus a riot was declared after officers fired at multiple times to dispel crowds, like with moms and little kids in strollers. Federal agents have used tear gas at least twice since their arrival over the 4th of July weekend, prompting concerns that they are being used to circumvent the court order. Before Wolf arrived, Portland police arrested 9 people early on Thursday yesterday as they cleared protesters from 2 parks near the courthouse. It wasn't immediately clear if the parks were cleared because of Wolf's visit, but you know it was. Anonymous worker bees at the Associated Press bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. State officials say they discovered a massive illegal dumping site in southeastern New Mexico while cleaning up a former limestone mining pit. The more than 3-acre plot of state trust land near Eunice has not been leased since the 70s when it was mined for shallow deposits of limestone known as caliche. Oil and gas companies use it for roads and oil well pads. During the cleanup, staff from the New Mexico State Land Office and contractors found 35 tons of trash and 8 tons of tires that likely were buried there in the 70s and 80s, the land office said. The office spent about $45,000 from its restoration and remediation fund to dispose of the trash and tires. The 8 tons of tires, I should tell you, are particularly dangerous. California had a 1 acre, not even 1 acre, of tires that burned for about 15 to 17 years. You don't want tires, buried or otherwise, catching on fire, which they will do. And then it's a worse cleanup. The land office submitted a report to the State Environment Department so it can assess the area and possibly find whoever was responsible for the illegal dumping. The initial project called for disposing of mine waste, contouring the area, and seeding it with native vegetation for future use. You know, just put makeup on a super fun site, a little bit of lipstick, let the kiddies have a picnic. Ever-present anonymous worker bees at the Associated Press bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A prosecutor who is pursuing charges against an Iowa newspaper reporter who was arrested while covering a protest in May told a judge that his office shouldn't have to give body camera footage and other evidence to the journalist's lawyer because his office was way too busy. Brad Kincaid, an assistant Polk County attorney, told Judge Christopher Kemp that because Des Moines Register reporter Andrea Shahuri had only been charged with misdemeanors, the case was considered a low priority and wasn't worth the time needed to provide evidence the defense has requested. Oh, really? You can't see the charges and what they are brought against you? Oh, yes, you get to see the charges, just no evidence of it. It's a turn and burn docket, Kincaid said. They're supposed to be handled with no delay and little cost. According to the Des Moines Register, Sahuri was covering a protest near a shopping mall on May 31st, less than a week after George Floyd died in Minneapolis, sparking hundreds of demonstrations nationwide. Police began shooting pepper spray and ordering protesters to disperse after some people were destroying property and stealing items from stores. Despite identifying herself as a reporter and leaving the area, Sahuri said officers pepper sprayed and then arrested her. Her boyfriend, Spencer Robnett, who had accompanied her due to safety concerns, also was apprehended. Both were charged with interference with official acts and failure to disperse. They have pleaded not guilty. The prosecution of Sahuri prompted the Iowa Freedom of Information Council to send a letter to County Attorney John Sarcone objecting to his refusal to drop the case. The letter was signed by 150 individuals, organizations, and news outlets, including the Associated Press. Ms. Sahuri was in a place where she had every right to be, doing a job that she has a constitutional right to do. She complied with police orders to disperse, and officers pepper sprayed her while she did so, the letter states. Even after she clearly established her status as a reporter who was on assignment, she was held in custody. Sahuri and Robnett are represented by attorney Nick Kleinfeld, who is asking the judge to order prosecutors to provide police reports, body camera recordings, and police policy and training information. If authorities plan to prosecute Sahuri and Robnett and give them criminal records, Kleinfeld argued, they should provide evidence of the alleged crimes, as spelled out in the U.S. Constitution. The judge will consider the arguments and hold a hearing in August to set a trial date. I don't know. See, if it's a turn and burn docket, why doesn't the judge just say she can go free with no charges applied? Well, we live in different times now, at least until November. But then we gotta wait till January to figure out how to really get rid of this guy, don't we? Okay, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, it's not a pound sign, Grandpa. Okay, I'm going to admit something embarrassing to you. When I first saw this documentary's title, I thought there was a typo. There's a pound sign in front of it, but it's not a pound sign. The title is #Anne Frank Parallel Lives, and that tells you how old and or out of it I am, and maybe how I'm not the target audience for this film. If you don't know, Anne Frank, or Anna Frank as this film pronounces it, addressed her diary, portions of which you can see and hear read by the gift to cinema Helen Mirren, to a fictional friend named Kitty. So the filmmakers, interspersed with Mirren's readings and narration, have a modern girl about Anna's age who looks like Anna start in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp and then follow her path back to Amsterdam, texting to Anna all the way. Her handle is @KatarinaCat, so the conceit is, here is a modern Kitty to answer Anna back, and okay, that's creative. But her texts don't sound like those of a 15-year-old girl. They sound like study questions at the end of a chapter. Where can one find the strength? How can one adapt? Could I have done it? #rebellion, #imagination. But Mirren and Kat are only 2 out of 4 interspersed parts of this documentary. Part 3 is interviews with historians and such, of course, but for Part 4, the filmmakers have found 4 female Holocaust survivors who were around Anna's age during the Holocaust. So we get to hear these women tell their stories before, during, and after the camps, hence the parallel lives, and they're very interesting. Still, Helen Mirren emotively reading from Anna's diary seemed a little much, and do we really need young, beautiful texting Martina Gatti to identify with one of the most moving memoirs of the 20th century? But we already know not to trust me. Maybe this take is just what you need to reach today's info-fed, anxiety, and attention disorder, desensitized, empathy deficit youth. Hashtag you kids and your cell phones and your video games. Hashtag get off my lawn. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. You're at the supermarket, trying to choose a ripe tomato, when behind you hear... If you're like most people, you probably hold your breath, tighten your mask, and hope you don't catch whatever patient zero is spraying all over the fresh produce. And if you're like most people, chances are you're overreacting. Because a new study shows that we're not very skilled when it comes to diagnosing infectiousness based on the sound of a cough or sneeze. The work is in the Proceedings of the Royal Society Biological Sciences. Previous studies have shown that folks can tell when someone's sick based on how they look, or in some cases, how they smell. So it's only natural to wonder whether the same would hold true for an assessment with our ears. So researchers asked volunteers to listen to audio clips of people hacking and sneezing.
Half of the coughs and sneezes were produced by people with an infectious illness, like the flu or the common cold, and half were produced by benign causes, like eating too much cinnamon all at once or sticking a Q-tip up their noses.
Nicholas Mikulak, a grad student in social psychology at the University of Michigan.
We clipped these sounds from YouTube videos in which people told their audience that they were sick. Many reported having been diagnosed by a medical professional. All this said, we could not directly confirm whether people in our sound clips were infectious or not.
And what he found?
Across 4 studies of over 600 participants in total, on average, people guessed 4 out of 10 sounds correctly, which is consistent with random guessing. In other words, they weren't very good at judging whether the sounds were infected.
But being bad judges didn't dampen their confidence. When asked how sure they were about their guesses, on a scale of 1 to 9, participants reported an average certainty of 7.
Interestingly, we didn't find any evidence that people who were more certain about their guesses were any more or less likely to guess correctly.
So what made them so sure that certain sounds were sure signs of disease? Well, the sickies, they figured, made noises that seemed the most gross.
The more disgusting they perceived a sound, the more likely they were to judge it infectious, even if the sound wasn't infectious.
So, might be deemed more contagious than depending on your own personal nastyometer. All that's to say,
even if it seems like you can tell whether a cough or sneeze is infectious based on how disgusting it sounds, that feeling has the potential to mislead you.
In other words, you can't judge a bug by its cougher. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Heart disease and stroke can be catastrophic. They're leading causes of death, disability, and healthcare spending in the U.S., yet they're largely preventable. Alarmingly, heart disease and stroke are taking a toll on middle-aged adults 35 to 64, with over 800,000 deaths and hospitalizations in 2016. Million Hearts is a national initiative focused on preventing 1 million heart attacks, strokes, and other cardiovascular events by 2022. Coordinated actions by Million Hearts partners in communities, healthcare, and public health will keep people healthy, optimize care, and improve outcomes in populations at risk. Everyone has a part to play. Focus on the ABCs of heart health. A. Aspirin use when appropriate. B. Blood pressure control. C. cholesterol management, and S, smoking cessation. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
The president isn't above the law.
My name is Ramsey Clark, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
That's what the Supreme Court in July emphatically ruled in the case in which the Manhattan District Attorney, Cyrus Vance, had issued a subpoena to Donald Trump's accounting firm, seeking certain of the president's financial records. The DA is investigating hush money payments that were made as Trump was running for president in 2016. Mr. Trump and his company reimbursed Michael Cohen, he's Trump's former lawyer and fixer, for payments Cohen made to pornographic film actress Stormy Daniels and Playboy model Karen McDougal, both of whom say they had an affair with Mr. Trump and were paid to stay quiet. Mr. Trump objected to producing the records. In this case, the Supreme Court categorically rejected the president's sweeping claims of presidential immunity, his claim that no records about him could be subpoenaed from anyone, as long as he holds office, no matter how relevant to the investigation the papers might be, because, well, he's the president. To which the Supreme Court, in essence, responded, yes, you are. You're the president. But over 200 years of precedent stand for the proposition that in the United States, unlike authoritarian governments, no person, including the president, is above the law.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. The Teamster members of Local 574 in Minneapolis were back out on strike. Their strike had begun 2 months prior on May 16th. The striking Teamsters had effectively shut down much of the commercial transportation in the city. One exception was made for some farmers who were allowed to bring their produce to market. The powerful Citizens Alliance, created to oppose and destroy unions, tried to defeat the strike. The police clashed violently with the strikers, who tried to keep scab drivers from breaking through their picket lines. As the strike entered its second week, other unions began to strike in support of the Teamsters. Clashes between the police and workers intensified. Minneapolis labor leaders sat down with the police and proposed a truce. The governor of Minnesota, Floyd Olson, helped to arbitrate an agreement. The Teamsters won union recognition and the right for all strikers to return to work, as well as a system of recognizing seniority. On May 25th, they called off the strike and went back to work. But soon the employers began to backpedal on the agreement. They claimed that the negotiations did not include the workers inside warehouses and only covered those who drove and unloaded vehicles. Angered, the Teamsters went back out on strike. Soon, violent clashes between the picketers and police broke out again. 2 workers were shot in the back and killed. The governor declared martial law and sent in the National Guard to restore order. A federal mediator brokered another settlement meeting the major demands of the union. It was a major victory for the Teamsters and a major victory for the workers of Minneapolis and beyond. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Another day, more records broken. The U.S. again hit a single-day record for COVID-19 infections on Thursday. Depending which source you turn to, there were somewhere between 75,000 and 78,000 new cases. The previous record of about 69,000 was set last Friday. The 7-day average of daily infections is now above 63,000. Just a month ago, it was 22,000. The death toll on Thursday, 969, was the highest since June 10th. The nationwide death toll rose above 138,000. Florida, Texas, and South Carolina all had their biggest one-day increases. 10 states on Thursday hit records for deaths in a single day this week. Florida, Alabama, Arizona, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, South Carolina, Texas, and Utah. And with 156 deaths in 24 hours, it was the second time in 3 days that Florida's 24-hour death toll set a record. Yet Governor Ron DeSantis is still hesitant to require statewide restrictions like mask mandates, which are now in place in more than half of the United States. Obviously, his strategy isn't working. Florida's coronavirus command center in Tallahassee had to shut down temporarily because too many of its workers got infected with the virus. And to make matters worse, nearly 1/3 of children who've been tested for the virus in Florida have tested positive. This according to data from Florida's Department of Health, and comes amid ongoing debate over whether schools should reopen in the fall. The Republican Party is finally admitting that they'll have to scale back their convention scheduled for next month and was moved from North Carolina to Jacksonville because of less stringent COVID prevention measures required in Florida. Meanwhile, the Washington Post and the Center for Public Integrity have flagged an unpublished report by the White House Coronavirus Task Force dated Tuesday that suggests that at least 18 hard-hit states, including California, Florida, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Texas, should enact stricter COVID-19 precautions such as mask requirements and increased testing. Again, the key word in this story is unpublished. Unbelievable. So the Senate is finally working on another round of COVID relief. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said he expects a bill out next week, but warned that it will not come without a liability overhaul. That means protections for schools, colleges, charities, local government entities, and businesses that follow public health guidelines, and for frontline health workers. The government entities and frontline health workers would only be liable for gross negligence or intentional misconduct. He's also demanding protections from labor and employment laws for employers who follow public health guidelines. The term may have ended, but the Supreme Court is still ruling, or not. On Thursday, the court dealt a huge setback to convicted felons in Florida who, thanks to an overwhelming vote by Floridians in 2018, should have had their voting rights restored once they served their time. The justices declined to set aside an order that effectively halted the voter registration of former felons in Florida who cannot afford to pay fines or fees mandated by state law. Justices Sonia Sotomayor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Elena Kagan dissented, Sotomayor calling it no better than a poll tax. And the federal government on Thursday carried out its second execution in 3 days after the Supreme Court ruled that executions could go forward. It had been nearly 2 decades since the last one. And finally, Donald Trump's niece, Mary L. Trump, broke all kinds of records this week. Her long-awaited and contested book went on sale Tuesday and sold close to 1 million copies. She sat for an interview with Rachel Maddow, which was fascinating and frightening. And she pulled no punches in talking about how unqualified her uncle is to lead this country.
The reason he's failing at it is because he's incapable of succeeding at it. It would have required taking responsibility, which would, in his mind, have meant admitting a mistake, which in his mind would be admitting weakness, which in my family was essentially punished with the death penalty.
Some disturbing news out of Portland, as Oregon Public Broadcasting confirms reports that federal officers in camouflage without any identification or badges, driving unmarked government rental cars, are grabbing protesters off the streets and not talking with local authorities. Oregon Governor Kate Brown tweeted Thursday night, quote, I told Acting Secretary Wolf that the federal government should remove all federal officers from our streets. His response showed me he's on a mission to provoke confrontation for political purposes. He's putting both Oregonians and local law enforcement officers in harm's way. And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com, and please click on that donate button.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the diner of life. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 65 degrees Fahrenheit, expected to be a bit cooler than yesterday, where we were topping over 100, even though we were not supposed to get that warm. Today we are expecting a high of around 90, sunny mostly throughout the day, winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight with lows in the low 60s, winds out of the north-northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour. With sunny skies tomorrow, highs in the low 90s to mid-90s, winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed coronavirus cases in Jackson County of Southern Oregon have now jumped to 203. We aren't tracking death totals, and that's because this is a Republican county, and they have just refused. They refuse. Well, we won't be getting any of that from the CDC now, will we? No, we won't. Grass pollen is rated high here at the mothership in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is good at 24 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is very high at 9. Barometric pressure is holding steady currently at 30.02 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 68%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 80 degrees and sunny. Paris is 79 and fair. Rome is 85 and partly cloudy, continuing with a thunderstorm advisory that could impact critical electrical infrastructure. Kyiv is 82 degrees and fair. Kabul is 80 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 82 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 68 degrees with rain, and they do not have a flood advisory for the first time in about a month. Sydney, Australia is 54 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 58 and cloudy with a fog advisory. And New York is 75 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Piovano of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The European Union's top court ruled that an agreement that allows thousands of companies from tech giants to small financial firms to transfer data to the United States is invalid because the American government can snoop on people's data. The ruling to invalidate Privacy Shield will likely complicate business for around 5,000 companies, and it could require regulators to vet any new data transfers to make sure Europeans' personal information remains protected according to the EU's stringent standards. Oh, how dare they? They care about their private citizens' private data. It will no longer simply be assumed that tech companies like Facebook will adequately protect the privacy of its European users' data when it sends it to the U.S. Rather, the EU and U.S. will likely have to find a new agreement that guarantees that Europeans' data is afforded the same privacy protection in the U.S. as it is in the EU. Privacy activists hailed the court ruling as a major victory, while business groups worried about the potential to disrupt commerce. Oh, why? Depending on how the ruling is implemented, companies like Facebook routinely move such data among their servers around the world, and the practice underpins billions of dollars in business. It is clear that the U.S. will have to seriously change their surveillance laws if U.S. companies want to continue to play a major role in the EU market. Max Schrems, an Austrian activist whose complaints about the handling of his Facebook data triggered the ruling after years of legal procedures.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Kelsey Johnson of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Canadian federal court recommended an external review of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service after it found the agency failed to disclose it relied on information that it was likely obtained illegally when seeking court warrants. In a decision, Justice Patrick Gleeson recommended a comprehensive external review of the country's main spy agency that aims to fully identify systemic governance and cultural shortcomings and failures. The review, the judge said, should also consider the manner in which legal advice is being delivered to intelligence agencies and its interactions with Canada's Justice Department. The court and the Canadian public must have confidence that respect for the rule of law is and remains a foundational principle underpinning all national security intelligence decision-making, Gleeson wrote. Justice Minister David Lametti told a news conference that the Canadian government planned to appeal the decision. David Vigneault, director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, said in a statement, the agency often relied on help from human sources who have access to individuals or organizations that could pose a threat. Those individuals are sometimes paid for information or provided with logistical supports like a cell phone. Let me be clear. The types of activities that are in question in this decision are representative of routine bread and butter practices used by allied intelligence agencies around the world, eh? Vigneault said. Both Lametti and Canadian Public Safety Minister Bill Blair said they took the court's finding very seriously. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know that Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we'll meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, l'âge tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, l'âge tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.